Here we are, your new home.
Cool. You know, I've never seen a robot's apartment before.
Come on in, I'll give you the tour. Let's see, where to start. Okay, this is the TV area. That over there is the breakfast nook. And over here is where you'll be living, which is great, because till now it's just been wasted space.
Seems kind of cramped in here, Bender. I don't think I even have anywhere to hang my clothes.
Look, pal, you've only got one set of clothes, and you're not taking them off while I'm here.
In this diorama tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use a lot of hard surface materials that you don't normally see me use this prolifically in a diorama to replicate one of my favorite scenes from all of Futurama, from the episode I Roommate.
Let's see, where to start.
These are the tools we're going to be using the most in this video. It's a metal ruler, an extendable box cutter, a mechanical pencil, and an eraser. These are my favorite tools for working with styrene and expanded sheet styrene. Also, you can get soft PVC sheet, which is what you see here. This is what we're going to be using a lot of in this diorama in a couple of different thicknesses. It's easy to cut, it's easy to glue, and if you can get it cheap, it's one of the best materials for model making that has existed since the beginning of model making, to be honest.
Oh, your guy.
So we can't make this diorama without talking about this Bender figure for the adult collector by Toynami, circa 2008. I could not afford these figures when they first came out because I was broke, and I think I was in a transitional phase in my life, but I'm happy I can afford them now. I love the accessories that he comes with. Of course, he's got some robot oil, some cash, some alcohol to fuel his power cells, and a couple of switch-out eyeball plates so that you can have your Bender doing whatever expression you want. And of course, Bender has bendy arms made out of vinyl. Love these eyes.
Hey, sexy mama. Want to kill all humans?
That's probably one of my favorite Bender lines in all of Futurama. Who knew robots could sleep and dream? I guess androids do dream of electric sheep. To make an apartment for Bender Bending Rodriguez, who is 40% titanium and 40% everything else, we need to get a height and a width off him because a lot of the rest of the diorama's dimensions will be dictated by that fact. So knowing the height and the width will help us extrapolate basically how big his closet/apartment needs to be. And if you know the gag in the episode I Roommate that I am making this diorama based off of, you know that there is a really funny payoff regarding the size and shape and design of Bender's apartment that I will not spoil for you if you haven't seen it, but I think it is the second or third episode of the entire show. Treat yourself. It's really, really hilarious, especially if you've ever lived with roommates, which I did twice. I had some funny escapades with my roommates as well. Also had some good times, some rough times, but this episode cracks me up and it was very relatable to me. So that's one of the reasons why I thought I'd start with this as my first Futurama diorama. I love how that sounds. Futurama diorama. As you can see, I'm just breaking down that initial piece of expanded sheet styrene, so I have a back and sides that will abut to one another and fit around our precocious little scamp. I'm marking the line of abutment here for the back to the side. That's because I actually don't want to glue anything there, and I want to be able to mask that off with tape later so that I leave that styrene face exposed so that when I super glue it eventually, it will have the strongest possible bond to the side. Because if I am super gluing a painted object to a painted object, I'm basically super gluing paint to paint and hoping that the paint holds the super glue. Don't want to do that. Here, I'm just adding wall details. As you see in the original show, I referenced that show a lot, that episode a lot. I took a lot of screenshots, clicked back and forth throughout this build to make sure I was basically following the same design scheme, and the counts of lines and the counts of nuts and bolts were roughly the same, or looked same. Frame to frame, they do actually change a little bit. That's one of the things with movie magic and show magic. Sometimes they're not as consistent as you think they are. That's one of the weird double-edged swords with trying to replicate things from film and TV. They use different sizes and different scales with different things for different views, and sometimes there is no one prop. Actually, most of the time, there is no one prop or one set to perfectly replicate. So at some point, you have to kind of just make your best guess and make sure that it fits the vibe and hope for the best. If you're not familiar, this is just thinner styrene. It cracks, it pops, it folds, it glues, it cuts really, really easy. Don't eat it, it's not a poplar. I do encourage you, though, to get some of this and familiarize yourself with it, because it basically is the backbone and has been the backbone of the model building industry for many, many years. Whether it's injection molded to make kits or employed kind of like this, where you can fold it and glue it to make different shapes. You see how I made a square tube there? I'm actually going to crack these off and make trim details right after I whip Bender with them.
I'm so embarrassed. I wish everybody else was dead.
This is just cheap, off-the-shelf super glue that I got at Harbor Freight Tools. I have a ton of these little packets lying around, and honestly, it's cyanoacrylate, just like any other super glue. This is sort of a medium viscosity. It works well for pairing flat surfaces to flat surfaces that have some level of width to them. There is many high-grade hobby brands of cyanoacrylate in different thicknesses that you might want to explore for your project, but basic super glues that have like a medium level of thickness or viscosity work great for this type of thing that we're doing. Simple, flat panel type of work like this, it works great. You don't need to get fancy. Comic book backer board. That's what that is. So adding a different layer of dimensionality, material thickness, type of material. This is a great way to introduce it. This is basically the equivalent of cereal box cardboard, but it's actually a little bit stiffer. It's less bendy once you have it pulled out. I don't know if that's because of the fiber count in the actual material or if it's because of the way it is laminated or pressed, but comic book backer boards in different thicknesses are an excellent thing to have on hand when you're doing surface modeling. I would definitely recommend going down to your local comic book store, not only to buy some cool comics and argue with your fellow geeks about who is the best Futurama character. Comment below, tell me who you like the most or who you like the least. Bender is definitely my #1 favorite character in the entire show.
Bender, honey, we love you.
Shut up, baby, I know it.
A close second would be Dr. Zoidberg.
Bender, you gotta spring me. I'll never survive in here. I'm too pretty.
And right behind Zoidberg would definitely be Nibbler.
The time has come to discuss matters of the gravest importance.
To cut out these little box shapes with rounded edges, I am using first my utility knife that has weight to it. I'm doing that on purpose because it allows me to cut with more control over a short distance with a straight line without having to pull out a ruler. And you see if I pull out a ruler, that is a ton of little straight cuts where I have to constantly reposition the ruler. Very inefficient. But if you can get good with a box cutter to do straight lines of a short distance, well, you'll be in good shape. And then I switch to this hobby knife to do those fine rounded edges in a tight space. Be very, very careful when you do this. Do not put your thumb in the direction the blade is cutting. I guarantee if you do, you will hurt yourself eventually. Don't do that. Learn from my mistakes. Exercise. Patience. As you can see, this does take a little bit of time. I did fast forward this section for you, but I wanted to show you that I do all these cuts by hand. It takes some level of time and patience, but for me, it's one of those things when I get into that creative zone or that flow state, the passage of time doesn't really bother me. In fact, I don't even notice it, to the point where I usually have Mrs. Euler's workshop calling me wondering where I am so late at night when I still think it's like 3 in the afternoon. When dealing with trying to super glue cardboard, one thing I will tell you is you probably should trace over your initial line of super glue after you lay it down, because cardboard is porous and it will soak up the super glue a little bit, especially if it's a thinner super glue, of which again this is sort of a medium viscosity, but I did kind of run over it twice. You do want to be careful though, that is a double-edged sword. If you put too much super glue, it will squish out and it'll ruin those nice clean edges you're trying to create with the overlapping of the materials, so just be mindful. This is a piece of scrap home wiring wire that I actually found when I was working on a job site. I picked them up when the electricians throw them away when they're long enough to be broken down for little simple things like this. You can get this in small pieces or rolls at your local hardware store for fairly affordable, especially if you plan on using a lot of this. I use this all the time to make miniature electrical cable or wiring or conduit or cordage. It even works for tubing if you get skilled with using pliers like I just did there, bending and straightening. You can get really creative with just using this. Copper wire is extremely soft, typically, especially the home stuff, so that it can be bent easily around corners and moved through holes for wiring inside of a wall. But you could really use any scrap wire that's solid core that you have lying around to do specific bends and things like this for whatever you need to add to your diorama. I use it all the time. I'm employing the use of some heat shrink here to add some thickness to the bent portion of this piping to make it look like there's an actual threaded piping joint here that's joined to the straight part of the pipe, like you might have in a real hanging situation where you actually have shelving in a closet. And then I'm taking some masking tape and slicing it into a smaller width and wrapping it around to make it look like that actual intersection of the joint is even thicker than where I put the heat shrink. Gluing this up with some super glue and then adding paint will help sort of tie it all together and sell the illusion that it is all iron or brass pipe. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I am masking off the edges that need to receive super glue in the future so that I have a very strong bond when I go to actually glue them. Since we're about to paint these, this is the time to do it. Go get a vise. If you don't have a vise, go get one. This thing has been probably one of the most valuable tools in my shop. or one of the most valuable helpers in my shop. It's one of those things you don't think you need until you have it, and then you use it pretty much every time you do a project. This yellow frog tape has a much lighter touch than the green frog tape you saw me using earlier. It's great to put over already painted areas so that you don't accidentally peel paint off when you remove the masking tape. You could use the blue masking tape or the brown masking tape or the green masking tape, but I would recommend waiting a lot longer than I did if you're going to do that. I think I waited about 4 hours and this paint was dry enough. I wasn't worried about it and it should be just fine. Here you can see me employing a time-tested, age-old masking technique where I basically cut away what I don't want. This definitely requires some level of hand steadiness and trusting yourself with a sharp, tiny object like this, so practice a little bit if you want. But basically, this is just so I can expose what I want to paint and cover up what I don't want. It is an amazing technique that you should learn to use. Just because I thought using only a solid color to paint these walls inside Bender's apartment would look kind of flat and boring, I did a layering technique where I sprayed a solid color and then I did an overspray color that was intentionally sort of blotchy so that when it cured, it would kind of create the effect that you see here on these walls, and just to have a little more interest and lifelikeness to the piece, even though it's for a cartoon action figure, I do think it looked good in the end, and I think it was a good decision. What do you think? Does that look good to you, or does it look weird? Time to superglue the walls. Or so I thought. After gluing those walls together, I realized I did not put on the bolt details on the trim that are supposed to be there. So to simulate the heads of the bolts, I actually got some nuts, believe it or not, to simulate that, because I don't have specific metal hexagon shapes that are that size that I can easily reproduce at the moment, so it made sense to me to just use a bunch of nuts. So we got all these nuts in the same size, and I put them on an inverted piece of tape so that I could spray paint them easily. Voila! Paint, nuts, and now glue.
Fried crack corn and I don't care. Lila crack corn and still don't care. Bender crack corn and he is great. Take that, you stupid corn.
Seeing as all the nuts were in place, finally it seemed like as good a time as any to go ahead and just glue the walls to the base. Let's see if our little man fits. So this is a lighting kit from Evan Designs. I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but they're great little setups if you just need 1 or 2 or 3 lights and you don't really feel like wiring them up yourselves. These are pre-wired with a battery compartment and a switch in line. I was just testing out to see how bright that light was, and it was about the right brightness, but trying to orient it into the orientation that I needed it in was going to be a little bit too hard because it had to look like a light bulb. So I ended up deciding to just go with a matching voltage 3-volt little warm white LED that I already had, since it kind of already resembled a light bulb. If you're not familiar with how to do basic LED work, you can go check out my how to do miniature wiring video. That is actually my most viewed video on my channel with the most complaints, because I misspeak a little bit in that video, but what I actually show you how to do is completely accurate. I just worded a couple of things and didn't catch it when I'd edited it, but it's proved to be one of the most helpful videos I've ever made, and people love it. So if you're a little bit scared of wiring up some lights into your diorama, go check out that video. It's extremely helpful, and that was the goal. Meant to help people get started putting a couple of lights and a switch with some batteries in their dioramas and miniatures. So right here I just decided to take some wire, some simple silver wire, bend it around the LED to simulate a pull chain for the light. I don't need to get super fancy here, but I did decide to get this little silver bead that I had in my jewelry wares and smash it down with my pliers to give the indication of the end of a pull chain. We're not going for anything hyper real here, just want to give the indication that Bender can turn his light on. Using another piece of expanded sheet styrene that is about 1/8 of an inch thick, I laid out a section of the apartment hallway for the Robot Arms apartments for Bender, where he lives. Basically a section that holds 3 different doors. I just wanted to give the indication of a hallway. I don't want to just do 1 door, thought that was boring. Didn't want to do 2 doors, didn't seem like enough. 3 doors felt just right, keeping it in that Goldilocks zone, so to speak. I cut out the trim around the doors and these kick plates for the bottom of the doors, also using comic book backer board. This comic book backer board happened to be white on both sides. I understand that a lot of comic book backer boards don't necessarily have that anymore. I forgot what the reason was, but it really doesn't matter if you use one that's white and cardboard colored on the other side or white on both sides. It's just cardboard. It does the same thing, so don't worry or stress if you're wondering if you have the right kind for your project. They both serve the same purpose. I love the way this blue color turned out after painting it on here. And as you can see in a minute here, I actually painted a lot of the other parts all in one go after making sure they fit correctly. I also realized the kick plates I actually had painted wrong. I caught myself later on that. I ended up gluing them down before I caught that, so I had to mask everything off camera and repaint them the proper darker gray that they were supposed to be. You'll see that at the end. I'm using a pair of flat nose pliers in my left hand and jeweler's pliers in my right hand to bend this piece of stiff steel wire into a shape that roughly resembles what you see in the show on the door handles, I think it gives the indication really well, and I ended up super gluing them down. This is me just scoring the floor where the divisions are according to the show, and then I drew a grid on to help guide these indentation marks, these little punch hole marks that I created here using a hammer and a metal tube that I had to give the indication of inset bolts in the floor as it seemed to indicate in the show. Even though sometimes hand painting a lot of little dots like this seems tedious, once you get into the groove it actually feels kind of therapeutic. And even though this design is meant to be very sort of cold and calculating and robotronic, I really like it. I find it very pleasing, especially the color scheme. Whoever designed this scene in the show I think did an amazing job. I'm using a high quality paint pen here to actually just go ahead and draw on the binary code that is the actual apartment numbers, which I thought was a hilarious touch and a very clever, nerdy touch. Bonus points to anyone in the comments who can tell me what number apartment Bender lives in. I realized later that my binary was incorrect on the second and third door and actually went back and changed it. So what you saw me drawing is technically incorrect, and I changed it later to accurately represent the proper order of the binary numbers according to what they would probably be numbered if the apartment complex was actually real. The time has come to assemble the diorama. Super glue is the medium of choice that we're going to use here, as we have so far a lot, but I'm going to go ahead and use these 1, 2, 3 blocks as little helpers. These are amazing for multiple reasons in a shop if you don't have them. I'll put a link below to get the exact ones that I have here. They're actually more affordable than you realize. I finally broke down and got these a little while ago. I've been putting it off for years and only wish that I got them sooner, to be quite honest. They're super helpful.
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
And there it is, an apartment fit for a bending unit. I love this episode. If you've never treated yourself to Futurama and you're a nerd or a geek, I highly recommend it. There is so many references to so many other cool science fiction properties, as well as all kinds of not dumb pop culture references throughout the show that have always cracked me up. Every time I rewatch the show, I'm amazed at how much I still love it. And I still love Bender Bending Rodriguez.
Yep, everything worked out great, thanks to good old Bender.
If you'd like to learn the skills to build yourself all kinds of different dioramas for your action figures, or you just love miniatures or props or special effects like I do, hit that subscribe, hit that like, and check out the next video. Thanks for watching.
That's the best thing I ever saw.
That was fun.